Tom Reed stood at the observation deck of Edge Point Station, his eyes fixed on the endless sea of stars before him. Most of his fellow scientists had called him crazy for requesting a posting at humanity's furthest outpost, but Tom had always believed that the real discoveries happened at the edges of known space. The station's dim lighting reflected off the thick glass, creating ghost-like images that danced across the reinforced windows. Tom's research equipment lay scattered across his workstation, a mess of tablets, scanners, and sample containers that would have given the station's neat freak administrator, Jack Wilson, a headache. Alert! Alert! Unknown biological signatures detected in Sector 7. The station's AI announced, its artificial voice echoing through the empty corridors. Tom's head snapped up from his latest specimen analysis. Sector 7 was the designation for the unmapped space beyond the station's regular patrol routes. The main screen flickered to life, displaying a thermal map of the approaching entities. Tom's heart nearly stopped when he saw the distinctive heat patterns. Every scientist in the galaxy knew those signatures. Shadow claws, the most lethal predators ever encountered by any spacefaring race. All personnel, proceed to emergency evacuation stations, the AI continued. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. The sound of running feet and panicked voices filled the station's corridors. Tom should have been running too. Instead, he found himself glued to the observation screen, his trained eye noticing something odd about the Shadow Claw's movement patterns. Tom, Jack's voice boomed from the doorway. What are you doing? The evacuation pods are waiting. But Tom barely heard him. He was too focused on the data streaming across his screen. The Shadow Claws weren't moving like hunters. Their formation was too tight, too defensive. They were running from something. Their heat signatures are all wrong, Tom muttered, fingers flying across the control panel. They're showing signs of extreme stress. Look at these cortisol analogs in their bioreadings. Jack grabbed Tom's arm. They're showing signs of being deadly space monsters that have destroyed 3 outposts this year alone. Now move. Tom shook his head. You don't understand. This isn't a hunting party. They're refugees. They're killers, Jack insisted. Everyone knows that. The evacuation pod leaves in 5 minutes, with or without you. Tom made his decision in that moment. It wasn't the smart choice or even the sane one, but his gut told him there was more to this situation than anyone realized. Then it leaves without me. Someone needs to stay and observe them. You'll die. Jack's face had turned red with frustration. Maybe, Tom agreed. Or maybe we'll learn something that changes everything we think we know about them. He turned back to his instruments, already setting up new scanning protocols. Go, Jack. Get everyone to safety. I'll transmit my findings as long as I can. Jack stood there for a moment longer, then cursed under his breath. Your funeral, he said, before running toward the evacuation bay. Tom barely noticed his departure. He was too busy preparing his equipment and downloading every scrap of data about Shadowclaw encounters. Most of it was fragmented. Few people survived meeting these creatures to report the details. But something about their behavior didn't match the savage, mindless killers everyone described. The station shuddered as the evacuation pods launched. Through the observation window, Tom watched the small vessels streak away into the darkness of space. He was alone now, on a station about to be surrounded by the galaxy's most feared predators. The thermal readings showed them getting closer. Their massive forms would be visible to the naked eye soon. Tom's hands were steady as he adjusted his instruments, even as his heart hammered in his chest. If he was wrong about this, it would be the last mistake he ever made. But if he was right, if there was more to the Shadow Claws than anyone had realized, this could be the discovery of a lifetime. All he had to do was survive long enough to prove it. As the first massive shape appeared against the starfield, its bioluminescent markings pulsing with what Tom now suspected was meaningful pattern, he whispered to himself, let's find out what you're really running from. The first Shadowclaw arrived alone. It crashed into the station's outer hull with enough force to make the entire structure shake. Tom watched through the reinforced window as the creature's massive form slid down the station's surface, leaving deep scratches in the metal plating. Something was wrong with its movement. The creature's right side dragged awkwardly, and its bioluminescent patterns flickered erratically, like a broken light. Tom had studied enough injured animals to recognize pain when he saw it. Recording log entry, Tom spoke clearly into his tablet. Single shadowclaw specimen, approximately 8 meters in length, showing signs of severe injury. Movement patterns suggest damage to right thoracic region. The creature's head turned toward the window. Tom's breath caught in his throat as he found himself staring into eyes that glowed like distant stars. They weren't the mindless hunter's eyes he'd expected. There was something there, intelligence, pain, and what looked surprisingly like fear. "This goes against everything we thought we knew about them," Tom muttered, keeping his voice steady despite his racing heart. The creature's head tilted slightly, tracking his movement. Its bioluminescent patches pulsed in what seemed like a deliberate pattern. Tom had a crazy idea. He walked to the control panel and switched on the station's external lights. Then, trying to mimic the rhythm he'd observed, he made them pulse in the same pattern. The shadowclaw's reaction was immediate. Its own lights flashed rapidly, creating complex sequences that Tom's instruments scrambled to record. It pressed closer to the window, its injured side now clearly visible. A deep gash ran along its armored hide, leaking a phosphorescent fluid that glowed faintly in the darkness of space. "You're trying to communicate," Tom realized. He adjusted the light pattern again, this time slower and simpler. To his amazement, the creature matched his sequence, then added to it. The next hour passed in a blur as Tom worked to establish a basic form of communication. He noticed that certain patterns seemed to calm the creature, while others made it agitated. Slowly, methodically, he began to build a rudimentary dictionary of light signals. A warning alarm blared through the station. "Hull breach detected in Medical Bay 3. The AI announced. "Emergency containment protocols engaged." Tom's heart jumped. Medical Bay 3 was where he kept the station's supply of advanced healing compounds. He grabbed his tablet and a medical kit, then ran toward the breach. Either the Shadowclaw had finally decided to attack, or he rounded the corner and stopped dead. The injured Shadowclaw had somehow cut through the hull with surgical precision, creating an opening just large enough to reach one clawed limb inside. Instead of attacking, it was carefully examining the medical supplies, its bioluminescent patterns pulsing with what Tom now recognized as curiosity. "You're looking for help," Tom said softly. The creature's head turned toward him, its lights flickering in what he'd come to interpret as agreement. Taking the biggest risk of his life, Tom stepped forward. He opened his medical kit and held up a tube of advanced healing gel. The Shadowclaw's eyes followed his movements as he demonstrated the gel's use on his own arm. Slowly, telegraphing every movement, Tom approached the creature's injured side. Its massive form could have crushed him instantly, but instead, it shifted to give him better access to the wound. "I still can't believe I'm doing this," Tom muttered as he applied the healing gel. The Shadowclaw's lights pulsed softly, almost soothingly, as if trying to reassure him. As he worked, Tom noticed more details about the creature's biology. Its armor wasn't just for protection. It contained complex organs that seemed to process light itself. The bioluminescent patterns weren't just communication. They were part of a sophisticated biological system, unlike anything humans had encountered before. "The others think you're monsters," Tom said as he finished treating the wound. "But you're something else entirely, aren't you?" The Shadowclaw's lights flickered in a pattern Tom hadn't seen before. It took him a moment to realize it was trying to teach him something new, perhaps its own name or a word of thanks. Outside the station, more Shadowclaw shapes moved in the darkness. But Tom wasn't afraid anymore. He had just made first real contact with the species everyone else had written off as mindless killers. Now he just had to figure out what had driven them to human space in the first place. 3 days had passed since Tom first treated the injured Shadowclaw. He now called it Swift, after watching how gracefully it moved through space, even while injured. The name seemed to please the creature. Its lights would pulse in a happy pattern whenever Tom used it. "The wound is healing nicely," Tom said, examining the rapidly closing gash on Swift's side. The station's medical gel had worked better than expected on the alien biology. "You should be back to full strength soon." Swift's lights rippled in response, forming patterns that Tom was getting better at reading. He'd learned that different colors meant different things. Blue for curiosity, green for agreement, red for warning. The complexity of their light-based language still amazed him. Recording Day 3 observations, Tom spoke into his tablet. "Swift has been teaching me about Shadowclaw social structure. They're not just pack hunters. They're a highly organized society." He paused as Swift's lights shifted to a new pattern. They used different light combinations to mark family groups, roles, and even personal names. Outside the station, the rest of Swift's pack maintained a protective formation. Tom had counted 12 adults and 4 juveniles. Their presence had caused nearby colonies to send out panic signals, but so far no one had attempted to attack the station. Swift touched one claw to the window, drawing Tom's attention. The creature's lights began to pulse in a new pattern, one that Tom hadn't seen before. Images appeared in the air, created by the interaction of multiple Shadowclaw's bioluminescence. "That's incredible," Tom breathed, watching as the light show formed a map of stars. "You're not just communicating, you're creating three-dimensional star charts." Swift's eyes glowed with what Tom now recognized as pride. The creature began showing him more, using light to paint pictures of distant worlds and strange phenomena. Tom realized he was being given a history lesson, the story of the Shadowclaw civilization told through light and shadow. "Computer, are you recording all this?" Tom asked, not taking his eyes off the display. "Affirmative. All light pattern sequences are being recorded and analyzed," the station's AI responded. Hour after hour, Swift shared more knowledge. Tom learned that Shadowclaws didn't just hunt, they were explorers, scientists, and artists in their own right. Their fearsome appearance and hunting abilities had led other species to assume they were mindless predators, but the truth was far more fascinating. "You've been trying to communicate with other species, haven't you?" Tom asked as he watched Swift create another star map. But everyone was too afraid to look past the surface. Swift's lights pulsed in confirmation, tinged with a shade of blue that Tom had come to associate with sadness. The creature added a new pattern, showing ships fleeing at the sight of Shadowclaw vessels. "Well, I'm not afraid anymore," Tom said firmly. "And once I show others what I've learned, they won't be either." Swift's response was interrupted by a sudden flurry of activity from the pack outside. Their lights flashed in urgent patterns, and Swift immediately moved to the window, responding with its own rapid sequences. "What's wrong?" Tom asked, though he already suspected he wouldn't like the answer. The pack's movements had become more agitated, their formations tighter. Swift turned back to Tom, its lights creating a series of images that made his blood run cold. The star charts reappeared, but this time they showed something moving through space, something that made even the mighty Shadowclaws flee. "You're not here by choice," Tom realized. "You're refugees, running from something worse than anything we've imagined." The images shifted, showing entire star systems going dark. Swift's lights pulsed with urgency, trying to convey the scale of the threat. Tom looked at his alien friend, understanding finally dawning. "That's why you risked coming to human space. You're not the hunters anymore. You're being hunted. And whatever's chasing you is heading this way." Swift's lights flashed in confirmation, adding a pattern that Tom had never seen before. Even without understanding the specific meaning, he could feel the weight of warning in those pulses of light. Whatever had driven the galaxy's most feared predators to seek help from humans was coming, and they needed to be ready. Tom sat in the station's main control room, reviewing the recordings of Swift's light patterns for the 100th time. What he saw chilled him to the bone. The threat Swift had warned about wasn't just another predator, it was something far worse. Displaying archived footage from Sector 12, the station's AI announced. On the main screen, images from an abandoned mining colony flickered to life. Tom watched as strange, shadow-like creatures moved through the colony's halls. They weren't solid like the shadow claws. They seemed to shift and flow like living darkness. Swift's lights pulsed urgently beside him, creating images that matched the footage. The creatures' patterns showed these shadow beings entering living things, plants, animals, even sentient beings, and taking control of them from within. "They're parasites," Tom whispered, the horrible truth finally clicking into place. "That's why you can't fight them directly. They turn your own people against you." The Shadow Claw's lights flashed in confirmation, adding details to the story. These parasites had invaded their home systems one by one, turning infected Shadow Claws against their own kind. Even their powerful bodies and natural weapons were useless once a parasite took control. "Computer, send emergency transmission to Earth Defense Command," Tom said, his voice steady despite his racing heart. "Priority 1. Authentication code read 7 Alpha." Unable to comply, the AI responded. "Long-range communications are being disrupted by unknown interference." Swift's lights flickered rapidly, forming a new pattern. The image showed waves of darkness spreading through space, blocking normal communication channels. The parasites weren't just attacking physically. They were isolating their targets, cutting them off from help. That's why no one knew what was really happening in Shadowclaw space, Tom realized. By the time anyone noticed something was wrong, it was too late to call for help. He pulled up the latest scan data from the station's long-range sensors. The results confirmed his worst fears. The same interference pattern was slowly spreading through human space. The parasites weren't just chasing the Shadowclaws. They were using them as unwitting scouts, following them straight to new hunting grounds. "We have to warn Earth," Tom said, turning to Swift. "But we need proof. No one will believe me without solid evidence." Swift's lights pulsed thoughtfully, then formed a new pattern. The image showed a captured parasite, held in a special containment field that the Shadowclaws had developed. They hadn't been able to stop the invasion, but they had learned how to detect and temporarily trap individual parasites. "You know how to catch them," Tom said, understanding dawning in his eyes. "That's why you came to this station specifically. You knew we had the right equipment to build a containment field." The Shadowclaw's lights flashed in agreement. Its claws moved gracefully, pointing to various pieces of equipment around the station. Tom followed along, his scientific mind already working out how to combine human technology with Shadowclaw knowledge. "If we can catch one and show others what we're really dealing with." Tom's voice trailed off as new sensor readings appeared on his screen. A wave of the strange darkness was approaching the station. "They're coming, aren't they?" Swift's answer was immediate and clear. The parasites had followed them, just as they'd followed every other group of refugee Shadowclaws. But this time would be different. This time, they would be ready. "How long do we have?" Tom asked, already moving to gather the equipment they'd need. Swift's light pattern showed the movement of stars, less than 2 days before the parasites reached the station. 2 days to build a trap, catch a parasite, and find a way to warn humanity about the true nature of the threat. Tom looked at his alien friend, seeing the same determination in Swift's glowing eyes that he felt in his own heart. "Then we better get to work," he said. "Because if we fail, Earth will be as helpless against them as your people were." Together, Human and Shadowclaw began their preparations. They had one chance to reveal the truth about the darkness spreading through space. One chance to show the galaxy that the real monsters weren't the ones everyone had feared. They were the ones no one had seen coming. The Edge Point Station's main hall had never been designed to hold a meeting like this. On one side stood Admiral West and 3 heavily armed human ship's captains, their hands never far from their weapons. On the other side, Swift and 3 other Shadowclaws towered over them, their bioluminescent patterns rippling with barely contained tension. Tom stood in the middle, feeling the weight of two species' futures on his shoulders. "The parasites will reach this sector in less than 24 hours, he said, his voice steady. "We need to work together if we want to survive." "Work together?" Captain Miller scoffed, his finger tapping his plasma rifle. "These are shadow claws. They've destroyed 3 outposts this year alone." Swift's lights pulsed in a pattern Tom now recognized as frustration. The other shadow claws patterns showed similar distress. "Those outposts were already lost to the parasites," Tom explained, pointing to the evidence on his tablet. "The shadow claws weren't destroying them. They were trying to contain the infection." Admiral West studied the data with narrowed eyes. "Even if what you're saying is true, how can we trust them? We can't even understand them." Tom smiled for the first time since the meeting began. "Actually, we can." He pressed a button on his tablet, activating the translation program he and Swift had worked on through sleepless nights. A holographic display appeared in the center of the room, converting Swift's light patterns into human text. "We are not your enemy," the translation read. "We fight the same darkness." The humans stared in amazement as Swift continued, its patterns flowing smoothly across the translator. "Our worlds fell because we fought alone. We will not make the same mistake again." "Impossible," Captain Miller whispered, watching complex scientific concepts and battle strategies appear in the air before them. "They're not just intelligent, they're advanced." "More advanced than us in some ways," Tom agreed. "Their light-based technology could revolutionize our communications, and their natural armor could help us develop better defenses against the parasites." Admiral West stepped forward, her military training warring with the evidence before her eyes. "And what do they want in return?" Swift's answer came immediately, its lights creating a pattern so clear it barely needed translation. "Survival. For all of us." The largest shadow claw, whom Tom had learned was their pack leader, moved to the center of the room. Its lights danced in complex patterns as it showed recordings of their battles against the parasites. The humans watched in stunned silence as the images revealed shadow claws fighting desperately to protect not just their own kind, but other species as well. "They'd been the galaxy's guardians," Tom explained, "fighting a war none of us even knew about. But they can't win it alone. And neither can we." Admiral West was quiet for a long moment, studying the shadow claws with new eyes. "If we agree to this alliance, how do we proceed? We have less than a day before these parasites arrive." Swift's lights pulsed with determination as it laid out their plan. The translator worked overtime, converting complex tactical information into human terms. They would combine shadow claw hunting abilities with human technology, creating a defense network unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. "It could work," Captain Miller admitted, his earlier hostility fading as he studied the battle plans. "Their strength and our weapons, we might actually have a chance." Tom watched as humans and shadow claws began working together, centuries of fear and mistrust giving way to the necessity of survival. Swift's lights pulsed with what he now knew was hope. "Tell your people to prepare," Admiral West said, turning to the shadow claw leader. "We have a lot of work to do and very little time to do it." As the two species began their preparations, Tom couldn't help but smile. In trying to destroy both humans and shadow claws, the parasites had done something unprecedented. They had united them. "Sometimes," he said quietly to Swift, "the greatest alliances are born from the darkest threats." Swift's lights flickered in agreement, adding a pattern that the translator rendered simply as, "And the strongest bonds are forged by those willing to look past fear to see truth." Edge Point Station had transformed into a war room in just 12 hours. Humans worked alongside shadow claws, mounting weapons on the station's exterior and setting up detection grids based on shadow claw light sensing technology. Tom watched from the command center as Swift directed a group of engineers in installing the modified sensors. The shadow claw's light patterns, now instantly translated by their new system, guided the humans with precise instructions. Latest scan results coming in. announced Captain Miller, who had become one of their strongest supporters after seeing the Shadow Claws in action. The parasite wave will reach us in 3 hours. Admiral West studied the tactical display, where red dots representing the approaching threat crept closer to their position. How many ships do we have? 5 human cruisers have arrived, Tom reported, checking his screens. And 3 more Shadowclaw hunting packs joined us during the night. Their light dry ships are faster than anything we've ever built. Swift's lights pulsed with urgent information. The translator displayed the message for all to read. The parasites will try to divide us. They feed on fear and distrust. We must stand together. The Admiral nodded grimly. We've positioned our ships according to your hunting formation. The Shadowclaws will handle close combat, while our ships provide long-range support. Tom had helped design their battle strategy, combining human tactical thinking with Shadowclaw hunting expertise. The station's new sensors would detect the parasite's unique energy signature, allowing them to target the real threat instead of their possessed victims. Testing containment field, one of the engineers called out. A shimmer of energy rippled through the space around the station, combining human shield technology with the Shadowclaw's light-based containment systems. Swift moved to Tom's side, its lights creating a private message. You have done what no other species attempted. You looked past our appearance to see allies instead of monsters. Someone had to be first, Tom replied with a small smile. Though I wish it hadn't taken a galaxy-threatening parasite invasion to make it happen. Their conversation was interrupted by blaring alarms. The tactical display lit up with hundreds of new contacts appearing at the edge of their sensor range. They're here early, Captain Miller shouted. Multiple contacts, moving faster than predicted. Swift's lights flashed a battle signal that all the Shadowclaws immediately responded to. Their formations tightened, moving into defensive positions around the station. The human ships followed suit, their weapons charging. All hands to battle stations, Admiral West commanded. Remember your training. Don't let them split us up. The first wave of parasites appeared as patches of moving darkness against the stars. They flowed like living shadows, trying to slip through the gaps in their formation. But wherever they appeared, Shadowclaw light weapons and human energy beams struck in perfect coordination. Containment fields holding at 80%, Tom reported, watching as the combined technology trapped clusters of parasites. The Shadowclaw's modifications are working. Swift's hunting pack took point, their massive forms moving with incredible grace through space. Their light patterns now served as both communication and weapons, disrupting the parasite's ability to possess new hosts. A sudden burst of darkness nearly breached the station's defenses, but 3 human ships immediately moved to support the defending Shadowclaws. Their combined firepower turned the attack back, proving that their alliance was more than just words. They're testing our defenses, Admiral West observed, watching the battle unfold. The real attack is still coming. Swift's lights pulsed in agreement, adding tactical data to their display. The translator worked smoothly. These are scouts. The main hive approaches. We must hold this line. Tom looked around the command center, seeing humans and Shadowclaws working together as if they'd been allies for years instead of hours. Whatever came next, they would face it united. Then let's show them what happens when they push 2 species too far, he said, his voice firm with determination. It's time they learned that some prey bites back. The station's sensors lit up with new warnings as the main parasite force approached. The real battle was about to begin, and history would remember this as the moment when humanity's greatest fear became its strongest ally. Space itself seemed to darken as the main parasite force arrived. The stars disappeared behind a wall of living shadows that stretched as far as their sensors could detect. Edgepoint Station's defenses hummed with power as humans and Shadowclaws prepared for the fight of their lives. Multiple hostile contacts, Captain Miller reported, his voice steady despite the overwhelming odds. They're trying to surround us. Tom watched as Swift's lights pulsed with tactical commands, coordinating the combined fleet's response. Human ships moved in perfect sync with Shadowclaw hunters, their different fighting styles complementing each other in ways no one had thought possible. "They're targeting our communication arrays," Admiral West announced as the first wave of parasites struck. "They want to isolate us like they did to the Shadowclaw worlds." But this time was different. The station's new hybrid systems, combining human technology with Shadowclaw light-based communication, couldn't be so easily disrupted. Swift had helped them build something entirely new, a network that used both radio waves and bioluminescent signals. "Containment fields at full power," Tom called out as the battle intensified. Targeting systems locked on parasite energy signatures. The space around the station erupted in a display of light and energy as both species fought side by side. Shadowclaws used their natural weapons and hunting skills to drive the parasites into prepared kill zones, where human ships waited with specially modified weapons. "They're adapting," someone shouted as the parasites changed tactics, trying to slip through their defenses in smaller groups. Swift's lights flashed a new pattern, one that made all the Shadowclaws immediately adjust their formation. The translator displayed their new strategy. "They hunt like pack predators, so we show them what real pack hunters can do." The Shadowclaw hunting packs split into smaller units, each one paired with a human ship. They moved through space like deadly dancers, using the station's gravity field to slingshot themselves into attack positions. "Look at that," Captain Miller breathed, watching as a Shadowclaw wrapped its body around a human cruiser, using its bioluminescence to shield the ship from parasite detection, while the cruiser lined up its shot. The battle reached its peak when the parasite hive itself emerged, a massive concentration of darkness that seemed to devour light itself. But Tom and Swift had prepared for this moment. "Activate the primary containment field," Tom ordered. "All ships, fall back to defensive positions." The station's modified systems powered up, creating a massive web of energy and light. The parasites, drawn to the apparent weakness in their lines, surged forward, straight into their trap. "Now," Admiral West commanded. Every ship and Shadowclaw activated their light weapons simultaneously. The combined energy created a blinding flash that illuminated the darkness of space. The parasites, creatures of shadow, couldn't withstand the concentrated burst of pure light. Swift's hunting pack led the final charge, their natural weapons tearing through the weakened parasite forms, while human ships provided covering fire. The hive, for the first time in its existence, found itself facing prey that had become predators. "The containment field is working," Tom reported, watching as their sensors showed the parasite force breaking apart. "They're losing cohesion." The battle continued for hours, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. Without their ability to hide in darkness or possess others, the parasites couldn't stand against the combined might of humanity and the Shadowclaws. As the last parasite signatures faded from their sensors, a deep silence fell over the command center. Then, slowly, cheers began to rise from both humans and Shadowclaws, their voices and light patterns merging in celebration. "We did it," Tom said quietly to Swift, who stood beside him watching the aftermath. "We actually did it." Swift's lights pulsed with joy and pride. "Together, we became something new. Neither prey nor predator, but protectors." Admiral West stepped forward, addressing both species. "This victory belongs to all of us, and it's just the beginning." She was right. News of their success was already spreading through both human and Shadowclaw space. The galaxy would have to reassess everything it thought it knew about both species. Tom looked at his friend Swift, remembering how far they'd come from that first terrifying encounter. "Sometimes," he said, "the best way to defy expectations is to simply give someone a chance." Swift's lights flickered in agreement, forming one final message. "And sometimes the fiercest predators make the most loyal friends."